Hello everyone, today we continue learning Python and today we'll talk about how to create cache using Redis. So let's start. First of all, what I want to do is open up my Docker because as you know, so I had a lot of videos on Redis and I run it in Docker file, in a Docker container. So you can do the same. So if you have no idea what is Redis, how to work with it, then you can watch my other videos where I explain what is it, the basic comments of Redis, but now we'll create a simple cache. Because in the first video I said that one of the most frequent usages of Redis is a cache system. So what is a cache, if you don't know? Caching system, cache, and so on. Caching system is when you have some results from the past and you save them somewhere where you can access those results faster. And why do we need caching systems? So imagine that we have a simple website or a simple application, a simple server. So our users, I need to draw a person. Yeah, he's beautiful. He accesses our web server, so our S. And our web server has a database, for example. So we can have caching systems for almost everything. We can have them for requests, for almost anything. And typically there are a lot of types of caching systems nowadays. But now I'll talk, for example, in DNS, we have DNS cache. There are a lot of caching systems, so yeah. But now I'll talk about database caching because it's the most, it's the easiest one for me to show you. So I have a database, I'll explain the code, but now we have a DB and our web server. So what happens when our user accesses some information from our web server, from any server actually? We need to go to the database and take that information out of that database. So the scheme is like that, and then we process that information and return it back to the user. But what's the problem? The problem is that users can access the information very frequently, or they can access the information that is that does not change for a long period of times. For example, what if I have 5 of my friends? So our application is about friends. So we have a database and it's a social network. And I have my friends in a table, in a collection, so somewhere. What does that mean? That means that if I don't change my friends, so my friend lists, if I don't delete friends, add friends in that database, and I just press or just request my friends list, what does it mean? Every time I request that list, so that query set, I really go to the database and get a brand new copy of my friends list. So what's the problem here? The problem is that if I, for example, sleep on the keyboard, imagine that situation. You are on your favorite social network, you have your friends, you went to a page where when it shows you your friends list, and then it's really late in the night, the stars are shining, the moon is full, and you go to sleep. And you sleep on your keyboard, and of course you press F5 because that's the button that refreshes the page. What does it mean? That when you sleep or when you make any request, I'll go to the database. So our server will go to the database. And imagine how many requests we will make to the database if you sleep like for 5 hours on F5 key or on F5 key on your keyboard. So, and though 99% of those requests are useless because your friends list does not change, nothing happens, and why do you need to make those requests? But that is without implementing caching system. And of course, our database has 100%, well, not exactly 100%, but you know what I mean. It has a huge a lot on it. So the amount of requests, of queries to process is very enormous. However, what if we implement caching system? What does it mean? I think I can go, yeah, like that. So what does it mean? We still have a database. And when our user makes requests or make requests, so does anything, we will have our Redis. Caching system can be anything, but in our case, it will be our Redis instance. And again, if you want to dive deep into Redis, then you can watch my other videos. That is just how to implement a caching system in Redis. So you need to be familiar with that. So when our user makes a request, instead of going to the database first, we'll go to Redis directly. So we are saying, Redis, do you have a difference of that person, of person A? If Redis has the key, so Redis again, it's a key value database, and if Redis has that key, so we have the result of our friends, then what do? We return that result from Redis and we return it back to our user. What does it mean? As you can see, there are no connections between database and there are no connections between database and our server. That means that we never touch our database. However, I said that only that schema is only valid if you have or if your Redis has user friends key. So user A friends key. What does that mean? That means that we need to get that result from somewhere, and we can get that result directly from the database. So imagine again, that is the first time we deployed our application, and the first user that came to our website asks for his friends. So server goes to Redis. Of course, there are no keys in Redis because we just deployed our application. It's brand new. Or we flushed DB in our Redis. Something happened. What happens next? Redis tells the server like, I don't have the key. And server says, okay, Redis, wait a minute. Server goes to the database and asks for that result. So for the friends keys, for the user friends, sorry. And database goes to the server. And after that, server tells Redis, okay, Redis, so these are the friends of that person. Remember them and save them somewhere. What does it mean? Now Redis has additional key. For example, 1. Key with number 1. We return our result to the user. And after that, what happens? The next time that we want to retrieve our friends, our Redis already has a key. And we will not touch the database. So again, the schema will be like right here, right there, and it goes right there. So that's the whole schema of caching database, of caching system. There can be a lot of caching systems, especially with different types of invalidation of a cache. I'll talk about invalidation a little bit. I'll talk about it later in that video. And now let's just go to the code. So that is the code without any caching system. So what do we have right here? We have SQLite or SQLite, it doesn't matter, free library in Python. So that is the pre-installed library, and it's used to work with SQLite databases. So it's like a database in a file. It's really simple, and you should never use it in like the real production. Well, it depends, but it's a really simple database, and it's pretty cool that Python has a module pre-installed so we can work with it easily. And then I have function get my friends. So we get a connection to our database, we get a cursor for the database, we execute our SQL query, select ID, name from users, because still that's SQLite, SQLite database. And then we get our results. So we fetch all, we close our cursor, because you should always do that. And by the way, we need to close our connection as well. And then we return our result. That's the whole code. But what is the problem? And of course we call our function right here. But what is the problem? The problem is that every time we make a request, so as you can see, we have some friends, Vasya, Max, and Vova, but they do not change. So they do not change, and we make 100% of our requests to the database directly. And if we want to implement the caching system, of course, that's a big amount of queries for a database, and we can reduce that amount, therefore reduce the load on the database. And in order to do that, we need some kind of a caching system. Again, it can be anything. You can store your caches in files. You can store your caches in a database itself, because, well, it's actually useless actually, but yeah, there is like, there are databases. For example, in MySQL, we have memory engine. That engine stores everything inside of your RAM, as well as Redis. So in our case, we use Redis, but there are a lot of things that you can use in order to implement a caching system. So let's go to Redis CLI. Okay, it opens. Let's flush DB at first. Okay, now we have like Redis without any keys. So I can show it to you. Keys all. As you can see, it's an empty array. So what do we want to do right here? Now we want to implement our caching system, and in order to do so, we need to connect to our Redis. So I'll use Redis library in Python. But of course, if you watched my previous videos, then you know that you need to install Redis. and Redis library because it's not pre-installed as, for example, SQLite 3 is. And if you want to install it, I'll not show you the command. Watch my previous videos. Okay, so now what we do? We need to open our Redis client connection. So I'll write Redis client equals Redis, Redis capitalized, like that. So Redis client, it's a client that will work with Redis, and we need to close it as well. So Redis client close, cursor close, and connection close. By the way, if you know anything about connections, then you know that that is an awful code, because typically when we open a connection with a database, we need to close it in finally close. So we try finally, try accept finally, try catch finally, something like that. Because if we just close them after we done something, what if I have an error in that, for example, I write users one or one users? That operation will work when that operation won't work, and thus we will not be able to close our connections, and then that can lead to a lot of problems. So don't copy my code, think about everything by yourself. Okay, but typically you'll be fine if you use try except, or if you use with clauses in Python, so with, like that. But I will just write like a very simple code today. And what do we need to do? Now, first of all, what we need to do is get the key from Redis. And you know that in order to get the key, we need to use get command. For example, get user friends. Okay, and as you can see, it returns new. New, it's an alternative of now in of none. So none in Python, now in SQL, new in Lua script language. And what we need to do is get that key. So we can do like cache value or cached value, cached friends. I think it's actually better to call it like that. Cached friends, Redis client dot get, and we need to get our key user friends, like that. So cached friends, user friends. What do we need to check then? If cached friends is not none, what does that mean? Of course, it returns new in a Lua script language, but Redis client in Python transfers that new, or serializes, converts that new to none. And what we can check that if our cached friends are not none, and it's very important to check for none, because if you just check it like that, what does that mean? If you have cached friends, or if, for example, not cached friends, but what if your friends are just a simple empty list in Python? Empty list in Python gives us false. So it's very important for you to use that clause. Okay, then if cached friends are not none, what we need to do? We need to return our cached friends. Of course, it's not the final version, and I'll show you the problems with that a little bit later. But what does it actually mean? So we get our key from the Redis, and if our key exists, that means that we already have the result inside of that key, already have this SQL query result. Then what we can do is actually return that result without using SQL at all. But if our cached friends is none, what does it mean? That means that we need to set that key in Redis. Therefore, after we execute our SQL query, what we can do is, after we execute, because we need the result to set the cached value. So cached value is again the past result from any kind of operation. What we can do here is use Redis client set, and what we can set is name. For example, name will be, not for example, but name should be user friends. In real caching systems, it can be a hash, it can be some kind of a specific value, for example, user friends 1, user friends 2, user friends 3, or for example, there are a lot of ways of how you can develop a caching system, but typically that is a great way. So Redis client set user friends. Well, that is not the great way, but that's how I want to do it, because user friends, you can have a lot of users, and maybe it's better to implement like an ID between user and friends. So you need some kind of a separator for different caches, because you can't store everything in one value in Redis. Well, actually you can, but it's stupid. Okay, so what we can do is set our Redis key. So name will be user friends, and of course value will be our result, as you can see it right here. But there is a problem right now. There is a problem on the 18th line, so right here and right here. So what is that problem? When we're talking about cache, we don't want to return different formats of value, different types of values in our functions. So for example, what if instead of just printing get my friends, I want to use some logic on that list. So for example, our get my friends should always return a list. What does that mean? That means that every outcome should lead to a list returned. Therefore, when we just use return cached friends, what does it mean? Return a key from Redis. And as you know, if you watched my previous video, then you know that we don't have like real lists in Redis. We don't have like lists, we have strings that are lists. So I can show it to you. Set, and again, if you haven't watched my previous video, don't freak out. We have lists in Redis, but we are using set and get command, not like lpush, rpush, or other commands. But if, for example, we have user friends and we need to set value like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, then when I get my user friends, I receive the whole value, and as you can see, it's quoted, so it's in like those things, stringy things. And yeah, that's why we don't have the list. We need to return the same data structure. That's what I want to say to you. And if we want to do that, we need some kind of way to serialize and deserialize our data structure when we return it from the cache, so in those lines, and when we set it to the cache in that line. The perfect example of that is, of course, JSON. So JSON or JSON is a data. I think everybody knows about JSON. It's a data transfer format. So it's a data format, okay? And what we can do is use dumps, JSON dumps from cached friends. So, or not JSON dumps, JSON loads. So JSON loads will get the string and will transfer it, or not transfer it, but deserialize it to a Python object. That means that we return Python object at the end of that return clause. So we will not just return strings that we get from our Redis client get, because Redis client get always returns a string. That's how just Redis works. If we have key, then we have value, and that value is always a string. There are no like integers. Well, there are integers in Redis. They are used, but you can't set everything that you set is a string. That's what I mean. And now what we can do is go to Redis client set and use the opposite of JSON loads. It's JSON dumps function. So what does that mean? When we get our string cached friends from the Redis, we will return JSON loads. So we will not just return a string. We will deserialize it to an object and we will return it afterwards. And the same goes for Redis client set. We get an object as the result of cursor fetch all. So I'm pretty sure you saw that like a list with tuples inside of it with the result of our SQL query. And what we will do is we will set, or we will transfer that object to a string that can be set to Redis. That's actually it. So let's run it now, or let's actually flash our DB, because I have my user friends flash DB, and I'll show you how that system works line by line. Okay, so let's start it. As you can see, it's connected. We're just going from Redis. Okay, and now we need to get our key. So now we got our key. Oh no, we not got it yet. Let's go here. Yeah, we got our key. And as you can see, cached friends is none. What does that mean? We don't have our key yet. And that's normal because we haven't made any requests before. That's the first time I run my program. Okay, and I flashed my DB before that. Now we are going to SQL because we don't have our key. Okay, we execute some results, and now what do we have? We have our result. So as you can see, result is 1 Vasya, 2 Max, 3 Vova. So that are some of my friends, for example. And now what I can do is use JSON dumps from result. So JSON dumps from result, if you want me to show it to you, I show it to you like that, because I have PyCharm Professional. I can, as you can see, we have like array of JSON object, not JSON, yeah, JSON array inside of it. And now, after that, we just return our result and we just print it. But now, if I run my program once again, what will happen is that my cached friends will not be none. as you can see, that is the result. Now let's go, and as you can see, we don't even have any SQL queries that are in our database. Yeah, as you can see, we return the cached result. So now what do we accomplished? We accomplished that I need to only make one request. And as you can see, after that, I can make a request to the Redis. So our system will work not faster. Well, actually, it will work faster because one of the advantages of using a cache is that if you use caches, they are considered much faster than databases or other data sources that you might get. For example, SQL database, so in our case it's database.db, as you can see, it stores all of its data on a disk because it's like a file. But Redis stores everything in a cache, and or in, sorry, not in a cache, but in RAM, so in RAM memory. So that means that, and if you don't know, RAM memory is much faster than your disk memory. Yeah, but there is of course a problem that RAM memory just if we restart our computer or if something happens, RAM memory will clear itself. So that means, and that's why we cannot use Redis as like the main database. Well, we can do it, but of course you need to be very careful with the data, because if something fails, if for example your computer has no battery left, so I have a lot of battery left, so that's great, but if your computer does not have any battery left, your Redis will stop. And of course, when you start your computer again, you will not have any data inside of that Redis. Of course, many people can argue with me that Redis has backups, but it's not the same. So if you know about Redis backups, that's great, but I think you also know that it's not the same as it is with databases. Because when you restart your computer, you don't lose your data automatically on your database. You can lose it, but typically you don't, if everything is alright with your disks. Okay, but now there is one problem, one additional problem. Actually, there are two problems I forgot to tell you about. So the first problem is that if we run our result the first time, so let me just show it to you, it's the problem of formats and data structures again. If we run our formats the first time, as you can see, we have tuples inside of our list. But the next time we run it, we have lists, just lists. That problem happens because JSON format, JSON data format does not support any tuples. The only thing that they have are arrays. And therefore, when we use JSON dumps here, we get rid of any tuples and we convert them to just Python lists. So you need to be very careful with that, and yeah. But actually, yeah, it's actually a really big problem. Actually, one part of your code can rely on tuples, so your class thinks that, okay, that variable is not, we cannot change that variable, you know? But yeah, that's just how it works. Okay, so now what I want to do, I want to show you how to implement invalidation in cache, because invalidation is a really important topic. So what is invalidation? What if now I add one friend, or what if now I remove one of my friends? So I have my database set up right here. Let's go there and let's remove one of my friends. So now I only have two friends. And if I run my program again, as you can see, it returns 3 results instead of 2. So that is not the big problem if you want real-time data. Of course, if you want like really real-time data, then you should not use any caches, because caches show you the past data. And in 99% of the applications, you can show your past data. For example, if you're building, for example, a social network, or if you're building some kind of a system where you can show like your previous data. For example, the data that was actual 5 minutes before. It's not a big problem actually for a lot of users. And if you, for example, work in a really data heavy environment, when you have like, when you only need real-time data, then it's better for you not to use any cache. It depends on a lot of things, but typically you don't need to cache values that you need so you don't want to cache values that you use every time, that you need real-time data every time. So I think you know what I mean. Again, I'll try it again. You don't need to cache values that you require to be real-time data. I think that's better. And how we can do that with Redis? So what is invalidation? Invalidation is when you, or when your system invalidates the previous caches. So what does it mean? For example, your cache is 5 minutes old, so we need to delete it because that's the, even if data was not changed, that's already a very, very old data. Or your cache can be 10 minutes, it can be 10 years, 10 hours, it doesn't actually matter. But there are a lot of types of invalidations, but I'll show you the simplest one, and we also can achieve it with Redis. So if you've seen my first video about Redis, then I showed you expire command. Expire command shows how many seconds will pass until your key will be deleted. And in get, what we can do is use x as, so expire, as you can see in Redis set key. It's like the same command, but they included, so what you can do is write Redis client expire, name, and so on, but you can you can inject that command, so expire command, inside of the set query in Redis. So now what are we saying? Name, so create user friends key and set it as JSON dumps from result and expire it in, for example, 20 seconds. If I run my code now, of course, I will not see anything because the previous key did not expire. But if I run my code now, and if I'll get my get user friends, I'll see the result. As you can see, the result is correct right now. But if I will use TTL from user friends, and if you seen my previous video, and then you know that TTL is how many seconds your key will have to live. So as you can see, 3, 2, 1, and now we don't have our key. So TTL is -2 and get user friends returns new. As you can see, yeah, we can like separate our cache value from SQL query if we look at those brackets. So if our value is from SQL, then we see tuples, but if it's from JSON, then we see, or from cache, then we see like just lists. And that's very bad again, because what you want to do is use formats, or use the same format for all of your returns in all of your functions. Again, it depends, but you typically want to return the same information from the SQL, the same information in the same format from the SQL and from the cache. Now let's run it again. So as you can see, now we will need to set our key in Redis. So as you can see, now we can access our key. And if I run my program now, as you can see, I receive it with lists inside of it. So that means that I never run my SQL query. So what I can do is just print SQL here. And if I run my program again, there will be no SQL because I never go to that SQL field. Because, yeah, now as you can see, we go to SQL. But if I run it again, no SQL. Why? Because we use our cached value. And you can tweak your X parameter in your set command in order to set different values for different types of keys. For example, if you want your key to be 5 minutes old, and after that, only after that, you delete your key, what you can do is use 300 as the amount of seconds that you want your key to live for. And yeah, that is how to implement the most basic caching system in Python using Redis. So again, there are a lot of problems with that code. The first and the biggest problem is that if you have an exception here, you don't close your connections. That is one of the biggest problems with databases and with their connections. Then what you have is you don't return the same results, and then what you have, you use SQLite. So what are you doing with your life? Okay, SQLite is a really nice database for different things. It's a really nice database, so I didn't need to set up MySQL, Postgres, MS SQL, or any other database. I can use it in a file. So yeah, it's really nice, but you need to think about the code before you write it. So in that code, close all the connections. Maybe use settings, use different keys. So there are a lot of things, but that is the most basic caching system that you can implement in Python with Redis. So thank you for watching and good luck.